Welcome to Fireside Gaming. I'm Billum, and it's time for a return to indie games with this review of Nitro Kid. This is a game that I was pretty excited for after trying its demo out during a prior Steam Next Fest, and I kept it on my wishlist for a couple of years. But I am the type of person that easily fails to keep up with release dates, and it doesn't help that I also spend so much time playing retro games too. So understand that I was a bit surprised when I finally went to buy this game and saw it came out in 2022. Late 2022, mind you, but I still had no idea it had been out for over a year since its release. No matter the case, I finally bought the game and got around to playing it. And it probably won't come as any surprise to viewers that I enjoyed it. I already said as much during my demo discourse covering it, and I even went on to put about 14 hours into just that demo. With the game finally in hand, I've clocked in about 28 hours into the final product, and I have some more in-depth thoughts about it. First off, let's take a quick minute to talk about the setting. This isn't going to be a cover of the story, but rather just some basic details to give you an idea of what Nitro Kid's world is all about. The game takes place in the 80s and wears its love for all thing retros on its sleeve. That means there's loads of neon colors, a synthwave soundtrack, and plenty of references to older media. The basic idea of the game is that you play as one of 3 agents of Cinder. This is a mercenary group that's taking on Infinity, an evil corporation that has captured and started experimenting on the titular Nitro Kids. Our mission is to save these kids, learn more about what makes them Nitro, find out more details on Infinity, and take out any enemies that get in our way. One thing to keep in mind is that Nitro Kid is a roguelike. That means players aren't going to see everything the game has to offer in just one playthrough. Instead, more about Infinity, Cinder, and the Nitro Kids are revealed the more you play. That includes defeating bosses and elite enemies to build a codex of information about them. And I'll just note real quick that a playthrough may last between an hour to 2 hours depending on how efficient you are with your runs. The core gameplay of Nitro Kid is deck building and resource management in turn-based battles. Of course, the 3 agents, Lee, Jax, and Kay, all have their own decks that players can customize while traversing deeper into Infinity Tower. And yes, I mean deeper, you start at the top and you go down. Weird, I know, but it works. Being that this is a roguelike, you're not going to be building the same deck every time. Sometimes the cards that players find from events and shops or otherwise leave them leaning toward one deck type over another. Lee is the first character that players start with, so let's use him as our example. 2 of the easiest decks to build with him are jab decks and burn decks. A jab deck revolves around adding low-cost cards that give Lee attack or defense options while also providing him with free jab cards. Jab are zero-cost cards that deal minor damage, however they can easily spiral out of control by letting the player take so many free actions every turn. On the flip side of that are burn cards. Burn is a status effect in the game that is applied to enemies and then it hits them at the start of their next turn. For example, an enemy with 5 burn will take 5 damage at the start of their turn. The burn count on them then drops by 1 after that, meaning that they'll only take 4 burn damage on the following turn. The whole idea of this deck type is building up large stacks of burn on groups of enemies in a short period of time to deal as much damage as quickly as possible. And it's even possible to mix deck types to create combos. For example, one of the cards that players can get with Lee causes his jabs to apply burn damage to enemies. Considering jabs are free, this can cause burn damage to stack up fast. It keeps the gameplay fresh, and this is one of the examples of the type of deck combos players can put together. Each character has a base mechanic to make them stand out from the other as well. Lee gains movement cards from every enemy defeated, Jax applies pressure with his attacks while building a combo for bonus damage, and Kay, well, she's actually got a bit too much going on. Kay is the final character unlocked in Nitro Kid, and she is crammed full of mechanics. Unlike Lee and Jax, she focuses on ranged attacks over melee. This has her wielding a handgun and rifle, and players can switch between these 2 weapons, so long as they have the right cards in hand. The rifle deals twice as much damage as the handgun, but Kay can't use movement cards with it equipped. That is, unless she has a card that specifically allows her to move and doesn't have the handgun sign on it. Then she can move. The game's trying to mimic the feel of action games or movies, such as The Matrix or Max Payne, by letting her jump around enemies guns blazing, but it doesn't quite work right. On top of that, Kay has a magazine that holds 6 ammo starting out. While Kay's cards still cost energy to use, adding to that are magazine buffs. These give her benefits to her current magazine, but she loses those buffs after reloading. That means players will want to keep cards that can chamber on hand. Chamber is a mechanic that allows Kay to load multiple rounds back into the magazine without the act of reloading. If you're familiar with firearms, you probably realize how silly this sounds, but this is a video game, so we're just gonna all agree to let it go, okay? And it's also worth mentioning that she can increase her magazine size with other cards as well. That's just another one of her mechanics she has floating around. It can also be really easy to get screwed over by the roguelike nature of Nitro Kid and end up with a run that goes nowhere. All it takes is not getting a card to switch back to the handgun, and Kay becomes a sitting duck, unable to maneuver away from enemies. The variety of card types for chambering, applying mag buffs, switching stances, and more makes her overcomplicated. I actually think that Kay has enough mechanics built into her to be 2 characters instead of 1. Like, leave her with the stance switching mechanic and take all of the mag buff and chamber mechanics and move them onto a completely different character. Give me some kind of 80s robot that switches between ammo types by rotating a barrel on a gun arm between different magazines, something like that. This could flesh out both characters more instead of leaving Kay feeling underpowered when compared to Lee and Jax. Outside of this, there are also implants that players can earn during their runs through Infinity. These have a wide range of use to them, and they add a lot of extra utility to the game. One makes zero-cost cards hit harder, another causes every 10th attack to deal double damage, and so forth and so on. These implants can drastically affect how players build their decks, and you can also upgrade implants in the shop. It's also worth mentioning that the more you play a character in Nitro Kid, the higher their level goes. Reaching new levels unlocks additional starting cards and implants that the players can use. These can help shape the player's deck, lessening the chance of getting completely screwed over by bad card finds. And the last big mechanic in the game we need to talk about is Nitro abilities. Players can have up to 2 Nitro abilities at a time, and they offer a wide range of assistance during fights. Some let the player swap places with an enemy, there's another that lets them draw a whole new hand, and another that gives them free movement to a nearby tile. The amount of uses these have vary by how powerful they are, and players can refresh 1 use each when saving a Nitro Kid. They also have the option to exchange one of their Nitro abilities for a new one instead. And I think that finally wraps up all of the mechanics I need to talk about in Nitro Kid, so let's move on to the pretty and not so pretty stuff. First off, I really dig the 80s aesthetic. I grew up in the 90s, so I'm not that far off from the decade, and I have a sister that's roughly 10 years older than me, meaning we had a lot of VHS tapes with recorded shows from that era, and the synthwave soundtrack perfectly complements it. I had no qualms about buying the OST for the game, knowing full well I'll end up mixing it in with the other albums I own in this genre. Unfortunately, I can't praise the card art nearly as highly. Nitro Kid uses the art on its cards to reference other media, and by reference I mean directly trace over top of still movie frames. It goes a bit beyond homaging the source material and instead just comes across as lazily ripping it off. I've only highlighted a couple of blatant examples from The Matrix and Kay's cards that were easy to reference, but there are loads of more instances of this in the game. Frankly, it wouldn't surprise me if this is the case for the vast majority of the card art. It's very easy to see in Lee's cards that the majority of his poses come from Bruce Lee, and I know I've spotted a lot of Jack's cards from elsewhere, they're just not coming to mind at the moment. Still, I did overall enjoy the time I put into Nitro Kid, and I'm sure I'll rack up even more hours in it in the years to come. I'll probably never see everything the game has to offer, but I almost never do in roguelikes. I have a kind of love-hate relationship with the genre. I love it for the first 15 to 20 hours, but I hate how the market is oversaturated with them, and it always sucks never getting what feels like a satisfying ending from games in this genre. If you want to check out Nitro Kid for yourself, it is only available on PC and only through Steam. It costs $20, which is a little bit on the expensive side in my opinion for what the game is. I feel like $15 would be more fair, and you can easily find it for a lot cheaper than that during sales. So I'd be advising you to pick it up at those times though. And with all of that said, thanks for checking out this review of Nitro Kid, and until next time, take it easy.